Today on The State of Us, build a library or a police station. Cities must decide. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined today by the one and only, your friendly redneck liberal and the senior resident historian here at True Chat, Mr. Lance Jackson. Today, we're going to talk about a choice that you may not have thought is necessary to make, but if your town could only have a library or a police station, which would you have? Specifically, we're going to focus in on the town of McFarland, California. Now, you might be sitting there asking yourself, McFarland, doesn't that sound familiar? Why? Tell us, Lance. Tell us, what should we know about McFarland, California?
Well, it is the location of a famous Disney movie talking about a farming region in Northern California whose cross-country coach took a program of minority children, mostly Hispanic Americans, and turned them into a running powerhouse in the state of California. The coach in the movie was played by none other than Kevin Costner, called McFarland, USA. And it talks about the work ethic of the people in this small migrant town and how they use that. The coach uses the work ethic to get them to become great runners and sacrifice for one another. And it's a really good Disney movie, but is based on an actual event. And the coach is still living in this town. The former coach is still living in this town. And after all those years of coaching, he's still there. And he's weighing in, obviously, on whether or not there should be a library that kind of serves as a youth center, babysitter, a place for kids to congregate, or the need for a new police station, because they have a police station, but it is currently not really as large as they deem necessary based on the number of officers they have. They are sharing desks and holding cells and things like that. And so the town says, yeah, well, we only have so much money available. So what do? Do we let the police take over the library and send the children on their way? Or do we make our police, who are in charge of protecting us, work out of an inadequate space?
Easy. And this is a town where there's gang violence, right, as well?
Sure. Between
the two town sides. And this avenue, Kern Avenue, happens to be close to the dividing line between the two. Part of the reason the police station is located where it is, but also a growing concern among residents about why the police need not only more space, but more officers, is to keep basically the public safe in the violence that breaks out in the area. So, and they're actually, when we say on the other side of the avenue, kind of interesting, Kern Avenue divides them. They are actually like across the avenue from each other.
Right.
So
they are the police building and the library are across the street from one another.
Yes.
So they're not just close in the neighborhood, but they stare across and look at one another.
On the side with the police station, 24 employees share a bathroom. 4 sergeants pack into one small office. The walls are so thin that the chief fires up a white noise machine to have a private conversation. The property room is a tiny closet stuffed with cardboard boxes full of confiscated handguns and smelling of sweaty clothes and marijuana seized as evidence. Kenny Williams who currently serves as McFarland's police chief and its city manager, looks across the street with envy at the library. In a move that has sharply divided the mostly poor farming community, he has been pushing to take over the library, owned and operated by Kern County, and convert the building into a new police station. His argument? Crime is exploding, the city is growing, the tax base is tight. Quote, "We're out of room. We have to grow. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it," Chief Williams said.
Well, I mean, he brings up some interesting some interesting points there that obviously they don't have enough room, if he's to be believed, which, yes or no, crime is continuing to grow in the community. I know we're going to save this until later, but is there another solution? But it seems like there's not. I mean, the whole basis of the article is to point out that the police really do need more room. And even people on the other side, the ones using the library, say, yeah, the police need more room. But why are you going to take it from us?
Not in my backyard. So McFarland, Lance, is a town of 14,500 people. And on a weekday afternoon, past the cluster of businesses just off Highway 99 and further afield, there's grapevines covered in white canopies that provide many residents a bare living. The streets were mostly empty until the reporter pulled up in front of the library to a bustling scene of school children just out of class scurrying inside. Some were with parents, some on their own. A lady that lives next to the library moved to McFarland from Mexico and scratched out a living from the fields until she opened up her own auto shop. I see it every day. 57 years old and a former city council member. I see these kids hanging out, doing their homework, doing what they're supposed to be doing. If you take that away from them, you're pushing them to basically hang out in places where they're not supposed to. So instead of helping the community, you're pushing them away to do crime and things like that.
So she then is advocating, she's not denying that there's not a criminal problem. There's not a criminal element in her town. But she's saying, well, if you take all of these children and you don't have a place for them, then they're going to walk the streets. And if they're walking the streets with being unsupervised, well, what's going to happen? You're probably going to see a rise in petty theft and property destruction, which then, is a slippery slope towards doing other things, dealing drugs, breaking into cars. So then you will need more police officers. So, what she's offering up is the library is an actual deterrent to crime in the community.
Amber Clarkson is the branch manager of the library and checked off the many programs, family board game nights, karaoke, chair yoga, that the library offers to McFarland, where about 30% of residents live below the federal poverty line. Quote, "It's more than just a book," she said. Perhaps more so than in wealthier places with more options, the library serves a vital role. On average, 200 to 250 people come through the doors daily. These days, Ms. Clarkson said, she is often asked, quote, "The police aren't going to take the library, right?" She tells them, "It's not my call." For months, the conflict between the police department and the library has garnered local headlines, and so far, the library appears to be winning. Kern County officials have resisted pressure to transfer the building, built in 1994 with federal money, to the city. They even expanded the library's hours in response to complaints that it often sits empty and are trying to help McFarland find other options. But city leaders say that it's not enough money. It does not have enough money to build a new police station, even as McFarland and its needs continue to grow. This year, officials annexed some 2,200 acres of unincorporated land, nearly doubling the city's size. Mr. Williams has proposed moving the library into a tiny storefront space currently occupied by a community health clinic for new mothers. Like the library, it's a vital resource for poor families. That proposal further angered some in the community.
Not being there, the obvious question is, why do you keep trying to find places that are helping the neediest segments of your community to put your new police station? I mean, you just brought in a whole new section of land into the city.
Right.
Why did you do that? Is there a manufacturing base going there or something that's supposed to create tax money that could then be used to get a building bond passed by the community? I mean, it just seems ironic that the two places that the police chief wants to move are both places that are helping the poorest people in the community, of which I think you stated 30% live below the U.S. poverty level of
Yes.
of the entire community.
Right.
And you're going to take away the two positive things that they have going for them. And you can't find any place else? I mean, that would be my question, is like, you mean there's no other vacant storefronts? And if there aren't any other vacant storefronts, then that should seem to lend itself that you have a pretty thriving community and should be able to go to the tax base. So find someplace else if they can't build it.
Yeah, I mean, I get the impression from the article, Lance.
I mean, you can tell where I'm leaning, right?
Right.
I mean, I'm all about, law and order, but I don't know. I mean, I coached for years, and my big thing with going to people in the community to ask them to support the athletic teams was, do you really want these young men and women walking the streets after school? Because I can show you what happens when they're at practice from 3 to 5 or 4 to 6, and then they have games and they're being held responsible for their grades, and they're in a community and they have to follow a set of rules, and they have a built-in support system of their teammates and coaches. The amount of trouble that they get into goes down, not only not only within school, but outside of school. There have been many troubled youngsters who I have coached and brought in, and during the season, they don't get in the trouble that they get into outside of the season. You don't always turn them around to where they become great citizens, but during the season, they don't get in trouble. And that's kind of what this library is all about, is it gives these kids a place to go so they're not walking the streets. So yeah, you don't want to support my athletic team? You don't want to support my library? Then you better be willing to pay even more taxes for even more police officers to deal with the problems the town's going to have.
Let's talk more about the McFarland Police Department and the struggles that it's facing. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. Before we talk a little bit more about the police department, I do want to mention something from the last segment that occurred to me that I think it's important to not gloss over. You heard about all these things going on at the library, and I think one of the things, it's even in the title of this episode, right? Build a library or police station, is that people think of a library as a place with books. However, for a lot of rural communities, I think it's very important to remember, right, that often a library does a lot of things other than just provide books for people to check out. For many, especially those that live below the poverty line, it may be the only place that they can access the internet. And you might say, well, how big of a deal is that? Well, we did how many episodes over the course of the pandemic about kids all over the nation and parents who would drive to the parking lot of a library to use its Wi-Fi because that was the only way their kids could get schoolwork done. That's just a small example, because it's not just kids, it's also adults and anybody else below the poverty line. That's just one type of resource that often a library provides anymore, especially in rural communities where there may truly not be any other institution that offers those services.
Well, when I'm driving around, it says looking to hire, and it gives a website. You physically don't go in and fill out an application anymore. So if you're an adult looking for a job, you need the internet so that you can even apply for a job these days.
So let's talk about the McFarland Police Department. But Lance, do we have a word of the day today?
We do. The word of the day is acumen.
Acumen.
A-C-U-M-E-N. Acumen. It's a noun. It means the keenness and depth of perception, discernment, or discrimination, especially in practical matters. Much of I.M. Pei's business acumen was shaped early on in his career in the late 1940s. It sounds like the town of McFarland needs some acumen here. They need to have some keen perception and discernment in a very practical matter. And this word comes from the English, and it traces its Latin roots from the verb acuere, which means to sharpen. And it is also the Latin word for needle. In its earliest English uses, acumen referred specifically to a sharpness of wit. In modern English, it conveys the sense that someone is perceptive enough to grasp a situation quickly and clever enough to apply that ability. So somebody needs to show some acumen here in this town and get them a police station and a library, because it sounds like they need both.
The McFarland Police Department itself has a checkered history, which has added to the controversy. It was established in 2010. Before that, the county provided public safety. The department has cycled through several chiefs, including one who was convicted of using city funds to pay for home renovations. It also hired numerous officers with problematic pasts. When Mr. Williams, the current chief, arrived in February 2021, McFarland had only a part-time police force. 6 officers worked noon to midnight shifts with no coverage the rest of the time. All the while, gang violence has been a growing issue. The city has seen 3 homicides so far this year, the same number as last year, and all were gang-related, Mr. Williams said. In October, after a series of shootings, including a drive-by in a nearby town, several McFarland schools' sporting events were canceled. When urging the county board of supervisors in late September to turn over the library to the city, Mr. Williams argued that his community is on the border between the state's northern and southern gangs. And so what do gangs do? They come and they shoot up each other and our communities. He told supervisors that he understood the value of the library. Quote, however, there is no explanation that anyone can give me that would persuade me to believe that providing a library service is more important than providing basic public safety service to the community, end quote. Mr. White, who's the former cross-country coach who has lived in McFarland since 1964, also spoke in support of the proposed takeover. When the author talked to him this month, he agreed with the chief and the city's public safety needs should come first. In retirement, he remains a hero to many in the community. For some, his words feel like a betrayal. Quote, he knows how these kids hurt when they don't have anything, said one of the former city councilmen who lives next door to the library. He used to give kids tennis shoes so they could run back in the day. Mr. White, in our interview, bristled at the criticism. I've supported the kids in so many ways. I've been very supportive in everything throughout the city for the young people. But his stance on the library has so stung the students, including those that want to be a social worker. So it is one of those, if you had to choose, right? Because what Lance and I keep coming back to, it's not been a secret, is why can't you figure out how to do both? But if you had to choose, what do you choose? Because on the one hand, you sort of have the preventative measure, right, of what the library does, which is hopefully a safe place for the kids to spend time, keeps them away from getting involved in some of the stuff that is currently causing the problems, keeping in mind that the library hasn't always been offering this. So, you know, the library's effects are longer term. They're not felt as quote unquote immediately. They're not seen as fast. And it can seem like just providing free childcare. But when 200 to 250 people a day visit this facility in a town of 14,500, it's hard to argue that it's not something that's clearly important, especially to the underserved portion of the community. On the other hand, 3 homicides a year in a town of 14,500 people and shootings that are preventing sporting events from taking place also seems something that I think I can imagine, Lance, in our town, right, of 13,000 people, that if we had had 3 homicides in the last year and shootings that were causing school sporting events not to happen, people would probably be very concerned about what are we doing to address this violence issue? Who's keeping us safe?
Well, and that's my bias, right? Is that I was sitting here thinking about our town of basically the same size.
We have a full-time police force.
And how many people do we have on duty at any given time?
We're lucky usually to have like 3 or 4.
Exactly. That was to my point when you said 6 for a 12-hour shift.
Mm-hmm.
One, I wouldn't obviously run my shift from 12 noon to 12 midnight. If I only had part-time officers and I was running a shift, I would run them from like 6 at night to 6 in the morning. I mean, I know, come back at me and I get it. I'm trying to have some acumen here. I understand that if the gangs know that you don't have police for 12-hour period, then they'll do their shootings at that point in time. But to not have anybody on duty after midnight, to your point of 3 homicides in a year, there have been times in this small town that we have been that close to that, or better than that. And better than that, more than that. How's that, right? But I think people, I've lived here almost 40 years now, and people think, well, we're just a small town. We don't have those problems. And yet when I pick up the daily newspaper, well, it's not daily anymore, but I pick up the local newspaper and read the crime report, I'm like, do you people understand what's going on? Have you ever served on a grand jury and listened to the cases that are presented every day at our local municipal court? I mean, it's amazing what goes on in this town, and people are glossed over and like, oh, this is just a safe little community.
Which also makes it all the more impressive that, for example, our police force manages to not let it be worse than it is.
Right.
I mean, that's the other side of this, right? Is isn't it remarkable that there's not more problems? Because with this few people to provide security for 13,000, it is relatively surprising that there's not a larger problem.
We're a triangle with 2 major metropolitan areas that run drugs on 2 interstate highway systems.
Right.
So, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff running through this town. The
20,000 cars a day pass through our downtown.
Right.
So there's more cars that go through our city every day than there are people. And the city of Urbana serves about 25,000 people. So even though the city residents are only 13,000, which again, when you start putting all that in perspective, it's like, wow, if there's only 3 or 4 people on duty and they're managing to keep it to under, 3 homicides a year, that's pretty good.
Right.
I mean, that's pretty remarkable. At the same time, it also then builds that component of, so they probably need more help than they have. And if you're a city like Urbana, right, which is where we are, or you're a city like McFarland, where do you spend the very limited dollars you have? And this one's even more complicated because it's a city and county issue. It's not an inner city, conflict. It's, well, the county provides this. So it's really not just McFarland that you're talking about. It's also the entire county, technically, that pays for the library. As you
pointed out to start this segment, it's a relatively young police force as far as a history. Not that the officers are young, but it was governed, like much of our county, by the county sheriff's department.
Right.
Which means you only have 2 or 3 sheriffs on duty to cover, 40 square mile county. So, I mean, if you're out and about and you see 2 sheriff's cars in the southern end of the county, they're 30 minutes away from the northern end of the county. You can commit a crime and be gone before they ever get there. And don't say, oh, that's too far-fetched. It's happened. They've broken, robbery rings in this county in my 40 years, because that's exactly what was going on. They would follow the sheriff's cars and know where the sheriffs are, and then they would commit crimes. The other part of the group, the gang, would commit crimes in the other part of the county.
Here's where you can go because nobody will be able to get there.
So we kind of have this understanding of what they're living with, but it sounds like the police force has not done a good job in the 12 years that the county gave them the right to govern, to police themselves. So therefore it's a tougher sell because, well, you're taking the money to protect us and using it to build up your house. But yet the current police chief does make some good points. They really don't have an evidence room.
Right.
They don't have a place where they can interrogate
You want us to do a better job, but we don't have the tools to do a better job. So what do you expect?
We're not going to do a better job until we get a bigger place.
The chicken and egg problem,
right.
You want us to be better at security, but we don't have the right resources to be better at providing for public safety. So the only way that we can possibly do that is if you provide us the resources to do it, which again, totally I get.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I think is so clear in this article, Lance, is it's a perfect example of a rural community that has a high poverty rate that badly needs both of these things. I mean, they need both, right? Anybody that reads this article is like, they don't need, they don't need the library or they don't need the police force. It's like, would you be okay living there? I mean, are you going to tell me that based on what you know about the crime situation there, that if you got rid of the police force, that'd be okay with you? You'd feel okay going to live there? Like, probably not.
And how do you attract new businesses there for a bigger tax base if you don't have a safe environment?
Right. Well, because again, how are the businesses going to support themselves? I don't want to come here if I'm going to get shot up or if I'm going to get robbed or, if I don't feel safe as a business and the residents don't feel safe going out, how am I supposed to make any money? All those many things. So it's definitely necessary, but I think we also have to take an opportunity to talk about, and this is what we've alluded to throughout the show, maybe we're thinking about these two mutually exclusively, thinking they can only exist in their silos. And what if there was a different option? What if we could think outside the box and maybe come up with something that would serve both interests, and it actually might be better on the whole for everybody involved, not just one entity or the other. Lance is going to tell you about that. Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. So I'm sure all of our listeners, Lance, are intimately familiar with the city of Urbana and the layout of everything. But in case you're not one of those people that's intimately familiar with, and yes, we're talking about Urbana, Ohio before. Oh, yeah, I know Urbana, Illinois. No, this is Urbana, Ohio. Market Street, there's East and West Market Street. And on West Market Street, there's the Urbana Youth Center, which coincidentally, obviously people are going to start figuring out maybe why we did this article, happens to reside in the former public library for the county. That's where the public library was for 65 years. It's now the Urbana Youth Center. On East Market Street.
And we still have, but we have a different location.
Correct. We also have a library and a youth center.
And a youth center.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes. Just so that people, we didn't get rid of the library in favor of the youth center.
We're a highfalutin town of 13,000.
Well, I think that McFarland, they would be very jealous of.
Exactly.
Because on East Market Street, we have our municipal building and our police department for the city of Urbana.
Yeah, the police department and the fire department are housed in the city building.
Yes.
Less than a full city block from the former library, i.e. youth center.
Yes. And the library is actually on the further east in town, and it's the county library for all of Champaign County. So we have all three, and they're all
the main branch of the county library.
Three separate things.
Because the county library has branches.
Correct.
I think in 4 different locations around the county.
So the point is that obviously, by contrast, McFarland probably be pretty jealous of what we've got. Exactly.
I mean, they could have an entire building that is, but the difference is no government money is going to our youth center, and they're being run by government money. They would probably have the same problem that our youth center has, and that is finding people who want to support it financially. Not that they're against the concept, and there is no public money coming in. So, but why couldn't you, and this was kind of your idea, but it's things like we've thought about before. Why can't you take the 2 spaces and find a way for both to work out of them in some form or fashion? And you say, well, there's no way you want to put, the bad element of society next to where kids are. Well, we already told you. The 2 buildings are across the street from one another.
They're literally across the street.
So, could you, and again.
Well, isn't it better? I mean, just.
And both sides would have to give.
Close to the police station than far away from it? I mean, if
you want the safest place to keep the gangs away from the children.
Right.
You would think you'd want something close to the police.
Further away from the police station.
But, it's one of those things where we're arguing either or. And to the theme of this show, to find a solution, what if both sides gave a little bit and the police took over a room or 2, or they ran their shifts differently, or, the library said, okay, well, we won't be open on weekends, and so that will allow this to take place, or we can, juggle and we can take this, or we'll take the smaller building and do this with it, but give us one main room to do this. I mean, there's all kinds of things. I would think if you sit down and talk to one another, you could find some solution to where you would keep both. Now, does that make either one of them happy? Does it make either one of them feel like they won or got what they wanted? Probably not. But do you maybe get that synergy that would come from having police officers be around a positive environment for young people, to where you maybe in the future see a decrease in the amount of crime that's committed in the town? And not that the police are working themselves out of jobs, but their jobs would become different. Instead of being, well, we're going to punish the people that are doing wrong, we're going to lift up the people that are doing right. We've seen videos go viral in the last, 2 or 3 years of police officers pulling to the side and shooting baskets with young people. And then all of a sudden becoming part of the game, and how isn't that good? And the kids are jumping up and down and high-fiving, and then the police officer comes by and hands out 10 ice cream cones or whatever. And then you don't think that makes an impact? You don't think, because then we say, well, if there'd be more community policing like that, then maybe there'd be less crime. But yet we don't support that. Instead, we hire more police officers to carry more guns, who end up shooting more people. And then we wonder why communities of color or communities of poorer neighborhoods, the kids are scared of the police and they don't see them as somebody who is supporting them.
Because keep in mind, we always talk about, getting the kids to see the police differently, but it goes both ways.
Sure.
I mean, if you're somebody listening and you're an educator or you mentor kids or you coach kids, or if you're involved with children, and you're really involved and you think about it, I think it'd be hard to contend that they don't change you as well, or they don't challenge you as well, and that you don't learn from them. They may not be doing that intentionally. You know what I mean? You may be intentionally saying, I'm going to teach you this lesson. They may not be trying to do that, but that doesn't mean that you don't learn things or grow. And I think there's benefits to both groups. I mean, there's the inherent benefit to the police of if we can lessen the crime and if we can improve our relationship with young people. As those young people become older, when they see things going wrong, they're more likely to turn to us as a place that you can trust that will keep them safe, which is what we're here to do in the first place, and more likely to let us stamp out those bad actors sooner, because there's very few things that are more powerful than word of mouth, and they're probably the ones seeing it going on. It's also the way that you break down those barriers of destigmatizing police and the communities that they serve. You are getting the police in a place with the people that need the services the most, and hopefully building that empathy. And also the other inherent thing of, doesn't it also make your library safer? I mean, yeah, it's right across the street right now. Well, the only way I can think of it being safer is if the police are in the building. I mean, we try to do that. We obviously don't do that full scale, but we try to make a point of inviting any of our police officers in to have dinner when we serve students dinner at the Urbana Youth Center.
When they see them on the street, like you said, the police can say, hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm fine, Officer Joe, and all of a sudden, well, he's in the area. So we better chill. And then the word of mouth through the kids, and then the parents, they bring their child home and say, hey, we caught him out after curfew. We're not going to get him in trouble, but we're worried about their safety. The parents all of a sudden say, oh, well, you're not the police that harmed my older son. You're the police who are helping me protect my youngster. And so to your point, it works both ways. And then the local police that come in, I've actually played board games and stuff, with them. We had a game of cornhole going one time, and I grabbed the police officer who happened to be a former student of mine, and we played the kids. And we beat them, and they couldn't believe, well, you guys are really good. An old man, former teacher, and a police officer beating the two champions of the youth center. And then there was some street cred. And I know that sounds silly, but it was. There was, all of a sudden, there was some respect. And you're just not the guy in the blue uniform that's going to bust my brother. Oh, you're the guy I played cornhole with, and you beat me. And then we sat down and had a hot dog and French fries together. And you're pretty cool. You do that with one, and one talks about it, and then those two talk about it to two other people. And before too long, the whole perception of young people and the police and that relationship changes on both ends. And you do that through the interaction. So to your point, you can have the criminals in the small building across the street. Keep the negative environment away from the families and the children. But have the offices possibly in the library where there's a constant interaction. And maybe one of the police officers doesn't have something to do, and he picks up a book and reads to little kids. Like you said, that makes me feel like I'm giving back to the community if I'm the police officer, and the little child has somebody read to them, which we know is going to enhance their ability to get a better education.
And possibly better than both sides getting what they want. Because, I mean, if they both got exactly what they want, then you don't get some of that synergy you might get. And I think there's been a lot of conversation, not so much on our show, but just the national debate about what should we be training our law enforcement to do, and that's not a rhetorical question. It is one that is a difficult thing to answer. You have limited funds, you have limited time. What are you going to train them to do? One of the best types of training, and we've talked about this so many times on this show, for any career is on-the-job training, right? And what comes to mind for me in this situation is a way that we could get training at basically no cost. And how often does that happen? And what are you talking about? Well, to Lance's point, it doesn't have to be a lot of interactions, but the human spirit, right? The human nature is the better you know somebody, even if you don't like them, the more empathy you will have for them. It's that whole thing that we've talked about online. It is much easier to yell and scream at somebody behind a screen than it is in person, right? It's also a lot easier to pull a gun out and shoot somebody that you've never met than it is somebody that you've seen 20 times and interacted with. Even if you don't like them, it's just a psychological human element. And if the library's serving the people that are the children of some of these gangs, right? Or maybe you're even involved in them, you're going to help show them an alternative, the children, right? You're going to help teach them that the police are safe to rely on, and you're going to inadvertently, psychologically train the police to think twice about how they're going to interact with these people. And not even think twice, but just a whole different mindset going in. Oh, I know this kid. I know his name. Like I can call him by his name. My reaction is probably not to pull my gun because I don't feel threatened because I know who this person is because I don't think they're threatening me either. It just a whole different on both sides.
It changes the entire dynamic
Yes.
of the relationships within the community.
Yes. You're creating more connections that make those confrontational relationships less likely. And I think that that's something that everybody in a community should want, right?
If you de-escalate violence, that's a good thing.
Yes.
No matter how you accomplish it.
Yep, exactly. So why do we have this conversation today, Lance?
Because True Chat has a mission, and that mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And hopefully you've enjoyed today's show. Let us know at let us know. Email us at podcast@thestateofus.org on how you like today's show. And hopefully it caused some conversations among you and your friends and your coworkers and people at home. And when they say, well, this sounds like something I'd like to listen to on my way home, tell them as a podcast. They can find us in all those favorite places like Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us releases new episodes as a podcast Tuesdays and Thursdays, first thing in the morning. Those same episodes are heard on the weekends on AM and FM radio stations around the country. For The State of Us, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to producer Bradley Butch, and thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.